Yeah, and then that's when it all went wrong.
Oh, I see. Well, we can sort it out.
If you're gonna keep this up, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave.
I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again.
These seedlings are looking really good. Yeah, they should be ready to plant soon.
I understand your concern, but we need to ensure this area is safe for everyone before we can proceed with any further work.
I know it's not easy, but we have to keep going.
I understand, but I'm just so tired of it all.
The afternoon sun was merciless, burning down on the narrow alleys of the town where silence was broken only by the rustle of empty bottles clinking in an old sack. An old woman, frail and hunched from years of hardship, walked slowly with a child beside her. The boy could not have been older than 10, yet his small hands clutched at rusted cans and broken plastic bottles as though they were treasures. His grandmother bent down, wiped the sweat dripping into her eyes, and whispered softly, "One more bag, just one more bag, and maybe we can buy your notebooks for school." The boy nodded, obedient and quiet. He was used to these words, words that always carried both hope and despair. Around them, life continued. People hurried to work. Children laughed in the distance. But here, in this corner of the street, their world was one of survival. They reached a pile of discarded garbage near an abandoned wall. The grandmother dug through it with shaking hands, pulling out bits of glass, old newspapers, anything she could sell. Her grandson crouched down beside her, trying to help. But then, suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed behind them. She froze. The child looked up, confused. A shadow loomed over them, long and threatening. The voice that followed was rough, impatient, and cold. "You thought I wouldn't find you, didn't you?" The old woman turned slowly, her heart thundering. Standing there was a man in his late 30s, tall, muscular, with a scar running across his cheek. His eyes glinted with malice as he crossed his arms. "I don't know you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You must be mistaken." "Mistaken?" He laughed, but the sound was sharp, cutting through the air. "You owe me 15 million. With interest, it's 20 million now, and I want it back." The child clung to her arm, eyes wide with fear. The old woman shook her head desperately. No, I have never borrowed money from anyone. You must have me confused with someone else." The man stepped closer, his shadow swallowing hers. "Don't play games with me, old woman. I have papers, proof. You borrowed the money last year, and now the time has come to pay." Her knees weakened. The heat around her seemed unbearable. She had just been released from prison a few months ago, trying to rebuild her life, trying to prove to her children that she could be better. But now this stranger with his accusations was threatening to shatter everything. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking, "I don't have any money. I just came out of prison. I'm collecting bottles to buy notebooks for my grandson. Please, you must have made a mistake." The man's patience thinned. His voice grew louder, attracting glances from passers-by. "Enough lies. You either pay me or I'll make sure the police know. Or worse, my men will come to your house and tear it apart." The boy cried, clutching his grandmother tighter. She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. Her breath quickened. She knew she had no money, no way out. The only option left was the one she dreaded most, calling her son. The man smirked as though reading her mind. "Yes, call him. That policeman's son of yours. Maybe he can pay for his dear mother's sins." Her eyes burned with shame. Every nerve in her body screamed against it, but she pulled out her old phone with trembling hands. She dialed. Each ring felt like an eternity. When he answered, his voice was calm, warm, unsuspecting. "Mother, are you all right?" Her voice broke. "Son, I need you. Please come. There's someone here. He says I owe him money. 20 million. Please, come quickly." The silence on the other end was sharp, heavy. Then came the reply, steady but urgent. "Stay where you are. I'll be there immediately." The man smirked wider, arms crossed in triumph. "Good. Let's wait for your son, shall we? I'd love to see his face." Minutes later, the roar of a motorbike cut through the air. The boy's eyes lit up with relief as his father pulled up, dressed in his police uniform. The young officer jumped off, his eyes scanning the scene, his jaw tightening at the sight of his mother's trembling figure. He rushed forward, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "What's going on?" His voice was sharp, directed at the stranger. The man leaned back casually, as though enjoying the tension. "Your mother owes me money, 15 million. With interest, 20 million. She hasn't paid. It's simple." The young policeman narrowed his eyes. "That's impossible. My mother hasn't borrowed anything. She's been trying to rebuild her life after prison. She has nothing." "Oh, but she does," the man said smoothly. "She has you, and if she doesn't pay, then maybe you will." The officer clenched his fists. Every instinct in him wanted to strike the man down, but he forced himself to stay calm. Violence would only make things worse. He took a deep breath and said, "I don't have that kind of money now, but I can give you something." From his wallet, he pulled out 2 million. He extended it slowly. "Take this. It's all I can give right now. The rest, I'll find a way, but you need to give me time." The man snatched the bills from his hand, counting them with a sneer. 2 million? That's nothing. But fine. You have 3 days. If I don't get the rest, I'll send men to your house. And when I do, there will be nothing left but rubble. He turned sharply and walked away, leaving the family frozen in fear. The mother collapsed into her son's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything. I should have never come back. Never." "Don't say that," the young officer interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "We'll handle this. We're a family. We'll figure it out." But inside, his mind was racing. 3 days. Only 3 days to come up with 18 million more. He looked at his mother's broken figure, at his son's frightened eyes, and he knew this was only the beginning of a nightmare that could destroy them all. And somewhere, in the shadows of the street, unseen eyes watched them leave, eyes that promised this story was far from over. Night fell heavily on the small house at the end of the narrow lane, wrapping the neighborhood in a silence broken only by the distant barking of dogs. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, suffocating. The young policeman sat at the wooden table, his hands clasped tightly, his knuckles white. His mother sat quietly nearby, her eyes swollen from tears, while his wife paced nervously, her baby on her hip. The boy, his son, sat in a corner, pretending to play with an old toy but listening carefully, his small heart burdened with fear he could not yet understand. The young officer broke the silence first. 3 days, he muttered, his voice low but edged with steel. 18 million more. That's what he wants. If I don't pay, he'll send his men here. He'll destroy everything. His wife stopped pacing. But how can we possibly find that money in 3 days? We barely have enough to cover our own expenses. And you know he won't stop even if we pay him. People like that always come back for more. The mother bowed her head, shame pressing down on her shoulders like an iron weight. It's my fault, she whispered. All of this is because of me. I should never have made those mistakes in the past. If I hadn't gone to prison, if I hadn't ruined my name, maybe none of this would have happened. Her son reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. Mother, stop. What's done is done. What matters is now. You're with us. You're trying. That's all that matters. But even as he spoke those words, doubt gnawed at him. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. That man's confidence, his threats, his papers, all of it suggested something darker, something deliberate. This wasn't only about money. It was about power, about control, and somehow his family had become the target. Later that night, when the others had gone to bed, he sat alone at the table, his thoughts spiraling. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. He thought about calling his superior, reporting the situation officially. But then he imagined the whispers, the questions, the judgment. A policeman whose mother is in debt to thugs? How can we trust him to protect others if he can't even protect his own family? His career could crumble in an instant. No, he couldn't let that happen. He had to handle this quietly, alone. The next morning, he woke early, kissed his wife on the forehead, and told her he had work to do. She looked at him with worry in her eyes, but said nothing. She knew there was no stopping him once he had decided. He went first to an old friend, a man named Hui, who ran a mechanic shop on the edge of town. Hui owed him a favor. Years ago, when Hui had been caught up in illegal racing, it was this officer who had helped him turn his life around instead of putting him in jail. Now, perhaps, that debt could be repaid. "Hey," he said as they sat in the back of the shop, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air. "I need money. Fast. 18 million. Hui's eyes widened. That's a lot. What's going on? You're a cop, man. Why do you need that kind of money in 3 days? He hesitated, then told him the truth, or at least part of it. "Someone is threatening my family, my mother. I have to pay, or they'll come for us." Hui leaned back, whistling softly. "That's bad, really bad. But I can only get you a few million, maybe 5. Any more than that, and I'll have to pull strings I don't want to pull. You know how dangerous it is to owe the wrong people." The officer nodded. 5 is better than nothing. Thank you. He left with the cash, but it was a drop in the ocean compared to what he needed. As the day wore on, he went from one contact to another. Friends, old colleagues, even distant relatives. Some gave small amounts, some offered excuses, and some turned him away entirely. By nightfall, he had barely scraped together 10 million. Still 8 short, still not enough. Meanwhile, in another part of town, the man with the scar sat in a dimly lit bar, a cigarette between his fingers, a glass of cheap whiskey in front of him. One of his men leaned in. "Boss, do you think he'll pay?" The scarred man smirked. "Of course he will. He's a cop. He can't risk scandal. He'll bleed himself dry before he lets the world know his mother owes me. And if he doesn't..." His eyes narrowed. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then we'll make him pay another way." Back at home, the mother sat with her grandson, telling him stories to keep his mind calm, but her hands trembled. She could feel the storm brewing. She knew that kind of man. Merciless, manipulative, dangerous. She had met many like him in prison, and she feared that this was only the beginning of something far darker than debt. That night, as the young officer lay awake, his phone buzzed. A message. No name, just a number. He opened it and froze. "You have 2 days left. Don't disappoint me." Attached was a photo. His wife holding their baby outside the market earlier that day. His blood turned to ice. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were watching his family. He sprang up, heart pounding, adrenaline rushing through his veins. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a trap. And if he wasn't careful, it could cost him everything. He whispered into the dark, to no one but himself, "If they want war, I'll give them war." But even as he said it, deep down he knew. This was a battle he might not survive. The night before, the deadline was suffocating. Darkness pressed against the thin walls of the small house, and every sound outside felt like a warning. The policeman sat awake at the kitchen table, his pistol lying in front of him. He hadn't touched it yet, but its cold weight seemed to pull at his thoughts. 2 days had already passed since the scarred man's threat, and the message with the photo of his wife and child replayed in his mind again and again. Sleep was impossible. Fear had transformed into something else now. Rage, determination, a desperate willingness to fight for the people he loved. In the bedroom, his wife whispered to his mother, "He's going to do something dangerous. I can feel it." Her voice cracked, filled with dread. The mother, her heart heavy with guilt, touched her daughter-in-law's hand. "It's my fault. If I hadn't dragged this debt into our lives, none of this would have happened. He shouldn't have to bear the burden of my sins." But both women knew it was too late for regret. The scarred man had set his trap, and the only way out was through it. At dawn, the officer left the house, leaving a note on the table. "Take care of each other. If I don't come back, remember that I fought for you." His wife found it minutes later, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the note to her chest. He didn't go to work that morning. Instead, he drove his old motorbike across town to a warehouse by the river, the place where his informants told him the scarred man usually conducted business. The building was silent from the outside, but he knew better. Inside, eyes would be watching, guns would be waiting. He tightened his grip on the handlebars. There was no turning back now. When he entered, the air smelled of smoke and damp concrete. The scarred man sat at the far end of the warehouse, legs crossed, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Around him were 5 men, each armed, their expressions hard and unforgiving. The scarred man smiled when he saw the officer. "Ah," he said, his voice smooth but sharp like broken glass. "The dutiful son arrives. Tell me, did you bring my money?" The officer held his ground, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I brought something better, the truth." The scarred man chuckled. "Truth doesn't pay debts." But the officer didn't move. "You think this is about money? It's not. You targeted my mother because you know I'm a cop. You thought you could use her mistakes, her past, to control me, but I did my digging. That loan agreement you claim she signed? It's fake. You forged her signature. And you've been running this scam for years, preying on families of ex-prisoners because you know they're vulnerable." For the first time, the scarred man's smirk faltered. The men around him shifted uneasily. The officer pressed on. "I have proof, witnesses, and recordings. Right now, my colleagues are waiting. If I don't walk out of here in 1 hour, they'll come with warrants, and this empire you've built will collapse overnight." Silence fell like a blade. Then the scarred man laughed, cold and cruel. "You think you can scare me with the law? The law doesn't reach here, boy. You've made a mistake walking in alone." He snapped his fingers. 2 men stepped forward, blocking the officer's exit. The officer's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. His hand hovered near his pistol. "Touch me, and the police will storm this place before sunset. You'll rot in prison, and you know what happens to men like you in there." The scarred man's eyes darkened. "You're brave. I'll give you that. But bravery won't save your family." He pulled out his phone and held it up. On the screen was a live feed. His wife and child walking near the market, filmed secretly by one of his men. The officer's blood froze. They weren't safe, not even close. Rage surged through him. He raised his gun. "Let them go! End this now!" The warehouse erupted in chaos. The henchmen moved, guns raised, but the officer fired first, the sound deafening, echoing through the concrete walls. One man dropped instantly, another lunged, and the officer swung, striking him hard with the butt of his pistol. The fight was brutal, every second a gamble with death. Meanwhile, outside, sirens wailed. His colleagues had come after all. The scarred man cursed, shoving his chair back. "This isn't over," he snarled, running for the back exit. The officer chased him, lungs burning, feet pounding against the concrete. They burst out onto the docks, the river glistening under the morning sun. The scarred man pulled a knife from his pocket, slashing wildly. The officer dodged, grappling with him, the blade grazing his arm but missing his heart by inches. With a final surge of strength, he twisted the man's wrist, sending the knife clattering into the water. Then he pinned him to the ground, handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists. "You're finished," the officer growled. The scarred man spat on the ground, hatred blazing in his eyes. "You think you've won? There are others, bigger than me. This is only the beginning." As his colleagues arrived, dragging the other henchmen out of the warehouse, the officer finally let himself breathe. His arm throbbed, his body ached, but his heart was steady. He had protected his family. For now. Back home, his mother wept when she saw him, clutching his face in her trembling hands. "I thought I had ruined everything," she sobbed. "But you saved us. You saved me." He shook his head gently. "No, Mother. We saved each other. Family isn't about never making mistakes. It's about standing together when the world tries to tear us apart." His wife embraced him, their child between them, the small boy holding onto his father's neck as if he would never let go. In that moment, the officer knew the fight wasn't truly over. There would always be dangers, always shadows lurking, but together they could endure. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in hues of fire and blood, the family sat together in their humble home. The debt collector was gone, justice had been served, and for the first time in weeks they allowed themselves to smile. The road ahead would not be easy, but they had survived the storm, and in their survival lay a truth stronger than any threat, any debt, any scar: love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond of family.